So I see a lot of videos online talking about these are the signs like that women and men should know about, like what is good for your nervous system with a romantic partner, okay? And all of that stuff is valid about, chasing intensity and how that's not great for your nervous system and how people need to be more consistent and blah, blah, blah. All of that is valid, and there's a lot of stuff on the internet about that. But I think there's some issues. There's a bigger picture that means that this situation keeps happening, because men and women are in situationships more commonly than we've ever been. And the internet means that people can access these situationships quite quickly, and they can maintain a thread of connection online that, wouldn't happen in the real world before the internet 20 years, 30 years ago, because they don't have the consistency to maintain a connection. So in the real world, it would just never have happened. But I want to talk about a few things. Like, I want to talk about why I think things happen from a non-judgmental place rather than teaching you things that you already know. Because for a lot of people, you already know that things should feel calm and not intense. But you then have this situation where you say to yourself, well, what have I done wrong? Because I know those things, but I've had a situationship or whatever it is. Most of us have probably had a situationship in our lives, okay? So first and foremost, it's quite common, particularly for the generation that I'm in, between your 20s and 30s. It's pretty damn common these days, because you've gone on apps and then you've messaged someone and it's not quite happened, and you also have access to people's social media, and so people stay in your energetic field a lot longer than probably 20 or 30 years ago. It would have just been like a see ya situation. But one thing I think is that our parents and the generation before us haven't really, it's kind of half parents, I would say, and half social media, but there's not been a passing down of how to communicate properly. And as someone who's quite a clear communicator, I've found that quite difficult, because a lot of people don't want to communicate. So avoidance has become incredibly popular, because conversations and communicating sometimes is difficult. So, for example, in my last job, I was basically a communicator to people who struggle to communicate. And sometimes I had to really have very difficult conversations with people. I had to explain concepts about the likely outcome of their trial, or where their child was going to live at the end of family proceedings. That's quite difficult to explain to somebody, and it's quite horrible, right? But you are clear. They know you know where we're standing, right? The art of being able to do that has gone. And what social media and the internet has done is there's a veil of hiding behind things, right? So you don't have to be a clear communicator. You don't have to have that awkwardness. You can kind of live in this grey area, and you hope people get the message, because you don't want to be the bearer of bad news, right? That's not doing a service to anyone. Men and women doing it to each other, it's not helping, right? You think, I just don't want to be the bad guy, But you're making it so much worse, because when you live in that grey area, the other person's nervous system says grey doesn't mean no, and grey doesn't mean yes, so I still can invest in this. It becomes like a weird game. It's like, okay, well, it's a maybe. So your brain, particularly if you're a people pleaser, if you're competitive, if you're not somebody that likes to give up, that gives you a green light to keep going, right? So in reality, if the other person has no interest, if you are a clear communicator, this would end. So the fact that people end up in loops, to some extent, you have to kind of acknowledge, does it feel right in my body? Is it consistent? Of course. But there also is some culpability in the fact that the other person has kind of encouraged the situation and left it in this place where the other person is picking up a maybe, okay? That is the first issue. Nobody knows how to communicate clearly anymore. And the reality is, it's not horrible to tell somebody you're not interested. It's actually very mature and adult. And yes, it feels shitty whether you have to say it to their face or over a text, however you choose to do it. But that is maturity in saying, I don't want this, or, you know, I'm not looking for a relationship, and I think based on what you've said, that's what you want. I'm really sorry. That's not what I'm interested in. And then both of you can go, okay, we're on different trajectories, let's go. But what people do is, because you get this attention dopamine buzz off the internet, people like having access to other people, because it's like, when I feel shit, I can pop you a message, say, oh, I miss you, or whatever, and I get access to that dopamine hit. We're chatting again, everything's like good, my evening's gone well, and, you know, this girl who's proper into me, this guy who's proper into me, is like popping up on my messages, and I'm feeling good. But it's not doing either of you a service. There's no connection there. Secondly, sometimes it takes a while, like I mentioned in a previous video, for you to kind of understand that a maybe is a no. And what I mean by that is, like, you've seen these things all over the internet that says a maybe's a no. If they're not into you, they're not into you. What I've found is this emergence of avoidance, right? So there's lots of stuff on the internet about dealing with avoidance, dating avoidance, right? That blurs the line, because the way an avoidant processes on paper is when things get really intense and really close and they feel this emotional intensity, they push back to process, right? And anybody that's not an avoidant doesn't. They either shut down, or if you're secure, you lean in, right? So that has also muddied the waters, because now everybody and their dog is an avoidant, right? So if you're in a situationship and someone's like, oh, I'm an avoidant, or you think, oh, they are an avoidant, that plays into the psyche again of, well, maybe I need to wait a bit longer. Maybe I need to be a bit more chill. Maybe I need to give them space. And that again plays into the maybe that we're talking about. But I think our parents didn't show us an example. Like, we never had this when we were growing up of how to actually deal with telling somebody you're not that into them. So, you know, we've created this system whereby people don't know how to communicate they're interested or they're not, and the other person is creating way too much meaning into it. This whole internet is bursting with things like avoidance and how to do this and how to operate to keep somebody interested. Fundamentally, human connection is not that, okay? Expression of how you feel, expression of things that make you feel unsafe or anxieties or whatever. We've all got our own bag of issues, right? Normal human connection means you're allowed to bring that and you work through it together. I was speaking to my stepmom yesterday and I said, the definition of a relationship is a connection where two people decide together to put effort into making it work, okay? That's fundamentally it. So what we've lost is the ability to do that. We've lost the ability to invest and put energy and time into something. We're now playing games of trying to figure out why people do whatever and strategically doing chess games. But that's not how your nervous system connects. You need to be authentic. If you are somebody who likes to share and likes to have deep connection with people, that's because you're a human being that's evolved to this point. Why on earth do you think humanity is where it's at currently? It's because from caveman age, we've had to connect with other human beings, build connections to move forward, okay? So actually, biologically, it's quite normal that you want to overshare about your life with somebody that you care about, okay? The fact now we've created strategic games where it's not cool to do that, and that you need to go silent at this point and do this and this and this, it's ridiculous. But I just wanted to remind people, if you're like me, who was living in this 21st century, in your 30s, very much in your lover girl era, you know, you've always wanted deep connections. The reality is that this digital space has created a lot of cowardice, and it's created a lot of people not knowing what they want because they want quick fixes and dopamine, but they're not actually thinking about what connection is. And I've noticed for this generation in particular, more people than ever have had relationship breakdowns, and they're kind of managing things like children alongside that. But nobody really seems to be looking for a romantic connection anymore, and the effort that's required to sustain one. And so for those of you that are, I think it is quite normal that you have found yourself in these situationships setups because you're looking for connection, and then the majority of people seem not to be. So one thing I want to say is that regardless of all these steps that people are talking about, you need to know, consistency needs to feel good, blah 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 blah, understand that the world is different than what you thought it was going to be. Connections are different. Connections are vapid at the moment, and it is difficult. It is really difficult. So I just want you to know that there should not be blame or judgment if you have found yourself in a situationship and you're like, how did I get here? Because you were open to connection and the other person wasn't. You were giving all in, you were coming from an authentic place and they weren't. It's a learning curve. We've all had to be there. But I think the best advice I could give is work. Everybody needs to work on communication. It's okay to say, I'm not into this. It's okay to say, I don't want to date you anymore. I'm not into that. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay to not know when you're going to the next step with someone. I don't know if this will work out, but I'm going to give it a try. But I think we have got so regressive in terms of our emotions because we can hide behind a screen that we're not actually having genuine human connection. And we have evolved and we have progressed because human connection is important. So remember that human physical connection is so important. Learn to communicate better. Learn to communicate your needs, but also learn to communicate your boundaries. Because the reality is, if you've been in a situationship and someone's made you feel like it was a maybe and you've wasted so much time on the potential, don't do that to somebody else. Be very clear. If it's not working for you, that's okay. But this maybe psychologically creates such a pit where people can get stuck for so long in that loop because they think there is a reward at the end. And the reality is there isn't. It's just somebody hasn't been straightforward enough to tell you that they're not into you. And whether they've avoided it, they've hidden behind different language, they've kind of gone hot cold on you, or they've ghosted, whatever the strategy is, yes, you need to identify it, but hopefully it can be a learning curve in the future that next time you have an interaction, you break this cycle and you do better.